Let's talk about how do we process JSON files into Snowflake warehouse in a normalized and denormalized tables using IICS. Okay, so before we get into that, let's talk about what is JSON. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, so which holds the data structures in the form of object and arrays. Okay, so let's take one sample JSON file here. So if you go to the next slide here, right, so you will see a JSON file which is holding the employee information. So it has multiple arrays and it has multiple objects. If you look at this, so if you see the employee is an object, right? Inside that you have different object members. So like you have employee name, employee number, department number, salary, employee address. Likewise, you have department details and employee contact details. Okay, and also within the employee contact details, you have two different type of contact details of the employee, which is where we can contact employee with a desk phone or the mobile phone. Okay, so if you look at the information for the employee contact details, so that has been stored in a two square braces, right? So if you look at the object, which is stored in a curly braces. So object is always stored in, will be stored in curly braces, and the array will be stored in a square braces. Okay. So likewise, this is for one employee structure. And likewise, if you look at the same structure, you will have the details for other other employees as well. Okay. So let's see how we can take this as a source and how we can parse this data into denormalized format. So on the right hand side, you have different type of relational tables, right? So one is in a denormalized format where we are going to parse this JSON data and we just convert into a single table. Okay. So on other side, right, if you look at, so the data that you see here is in the normalized format. So based on two arrays that we have in a JSON format, so one is employee has one array. Within the employee, there is another array, which is employee contact details, right? So based on that, we are going to convert that into two tables. One is employee and contacts, in which it has we are going to set up the parent and child relation between these two tables, where this employee key is going to generate by the IICS itself. Okay, based on the relation that we have in a JSON file. Let's see how to parse it using IICS. So let me connect to IICS now. I have connected to data integration services in IICS. So let me go to new. So the first thing what you will have to do is, so whenever you want to process data from source to target, right, you need to create a mapping. So that mapping will explain you from what is your source structure and what is your target structure and how exactly you're mapping the data from source to target, right? So likewise, the way you get the JSON files, right? You are also required to define the JSON structure within IICS so that your source, whenever you process some JSON files, right, your mapping should be able to understand like the data is coming in the specific JSON format. So that structure you will have to define. How do you define that? There is a component in IICS which is hierarchy schema. You will have to create hierarchy schema for the JSON structure that you are going to get in future. So based on that, we'll have to create a hierarchy schema. So now I'm going to create one component here, which is hierarchy schema for employee. Okay. So let me upload some sample JSON file here. You can upload any format, but the only thing is whenever you are processing any JSON file while using this mapping, right, whatever we are creating. So you'll have to make sure that JSON file should be in the same structure. So let's select any one of these JSON structures. Okay. Just validate if this JSON is valid or not. It's validated. Okay. Now save it. You have created the structure of the JSON file in Informatica using hierarchical schema component. Okay, now next thing is we'll have to create a mapping. Go to new. Here, let's create a mapping. Okay, so you have source and target. So in this case, you're going to take your source as your JSON, and your target will be your snowflake, in which we have created two tables. One is employee and contact. So that we will see later. So for now, let's understand a couple of things from the source side. So you have defined a JSON structure in hierarchy scheme. Okay, but how are you going to uh, consolidate that JSON structure within the mapping? And also, how do you pass the JSON files as an input to the hierarchy schema? Okay, so you will have to take a transformation called hierarchy parser transformation, and that's where you will have to define the structure of the JSON file by uploading the hierarchy schema. By configuring the hierarchy schema within the hierarchy parser transformation, you'll have to define the structure that we are going to get from source of the JSON files, right? So first thing, let's take JSON hierarchy parser transformation here. Okay, in which if you go to input settings, so there you see file or buffer. Okay, so file is nothing but like from source, if you are getting JSON files as a source. Okay, so you may be getting JSON files and you will have to process each JSON file every day. Okay, in that case, you'll have to choose the file. But sometimes what happens is you are getting the JSON file as a data, okay, as a data structure. Okay, and we are directly passing the JSON structure to the hierarchy parser transformation, and that's where it is going to take care of parsing the data. In that case, you'll have to use the buffer. So now in this case, what we are actually doing is, if I go to this path, right, where my JSON files are stored. So here you have two JSON files that I wanted to process. So in this, you have two records. Again, this you have two records, which means there are four employee details in both of the JSON files. This is on these two are we are going these two we are going to parse it. Okay. The first thing what you'll have to do is you'll have to create one text file in which you'll have to specify this JSON files that you are going to process. Okay. So now these two JSON files which are in a JSON formatted. So I have copied that like directory structure, directory name, and also the file name, and stored in one of the text file. So now I'm going to take this text file as a source. Let's go to source. So I have a connection already created for the directory. So I have this file exist in this directory, right? So for this, I have created one connection in IICS. So let me look at that. So this is the connection which is created. If you just look at the view of that, right? So this is pointing to the directory in our local system. Okay. Now, if you go here, you click on here, this is where you will have to select that text file which is holding the JSON file names. So I'm going to take this as a source, as this is holding these two JSON files, right? Let's click on OK. Okay, and then go to hierarchy parser transformation. Okay, so this should be file, and this is where you'll have to configure your hierarchy schema that is created, where it is going to hold the specific structure of your JSON files that are coming from source, right? So let's configure that hierarchy schema here. So hierarchy schema is created this folder. Let me choose that. And so as soon as you select the hierarchy schema, okay, so the input has been broken. So you'll have to reparse this. Now go to hierarchy parser. So now you see input field selection, right? So there is a column called path file. So this column is actually coming from the text document. Okay, you will have to map this to the JSON parser. You'll have to pass this as an input to the JSON parser. That's where we are mapping this field. And if you go to field mapping, so based on the JSON structure that we have or that we defined in the hierarchy schema, so you see the data has been split into multiple arrays. Okay, so with if this entire file as a if we take this entire file as one JSON file, right? So your root structure will start from this and it will end here. Okay, it will start from this and it will end here. Inside that you have employee, right? This is an array. So if you go back to this, right? So you have a root structure. Within that, there is an employee array. Within that, there is an employee object. Within that, you have object members. So the way your JSON file look exists, right? So based on that, this structure has been created in hierarchy parser by automatically. Okay. So within the employee, you have another object called object member called a department. Within that, you have object members. Okay. So, and if you expand this employee contact details, okay, this is another array. So based on the square braces that you see here for employee contact details, this has been taken as another array. Okay, so which means each employee has different types of contacts, and that's where we are this JSON file holding that information in square braces. Okay, now on the right hand side, you see you have a relational fields, right? This is where you will have to parse the data. Okay, so now what you will have to do is on the root, right? You have a drop down option, okay, wherein you need to pass all these columns to convert or parse it to relational output. Okay, you see now whenever you select map all descendants, right? So automatically the columns are mapped to the relational objects on the right hand side. Okay, in which if you see there are two options here, right? Format. One is relational and other one is the denormalized format. Okay, when by default it is actually selected relational. What is meant by relational? Relational is nothing but like that data will be separated into two groups, okay, which is nothing but like it is segregating based on the normalized structure. Okay, so if you observe here, there is a column generated by the system itself, which is pk employee in employee array, also fk employee in e contact details array. So what it is doing is your JSON file uh, having a relation here. So when you look at this JSON file, you will be able to say that so this employee contact details that are mentioned here are related to this employee. But when it converts into relational output, which means it is going to convert into two different tables, if somebody want to consume the data, how are they going to consume it? There should be some relation between this employee object and this employee contact details, right? So that's where you see is system itself has generated that key. Okay, so assume that this is an employee key which is generated in both the tables. Based on this employee key, you need to make that relation how you map an employee from employee table to the contact table. Okay, based on this employee key which is generated by the system itself. Okay, if I select denormalized here, so what is happening in this case is, see, it is in a denormalized format where it is not going to, where it is not splitting the data into two different objects, right? So example, if we go back to this, right? So if you take John as an employee, right? So it has two records where there is a data duplication, right? So you have a data duplication of the John employee, okay, which is splitting into two records based on because it has two different contact types. Okay, it is kind of wasting the space in the database perspective. Okay, whenever you store the data in a warehouse, right? You always better to maintain the data in a normalized format so that the duplication will be avoided and also the space will be saved. Okay, so whoever want to consume the data from both the tables, they can make a relation between these two tables by doing some joins. They consume it. Okay, so this is in a denormalized format, right? So if you want to convert into denormalized format, you will have to choose the property called denormalized. And if you want to convert into relational format or normalized format, you'll have to choose the property called relational. Okay. Now, this hierarchy parser will take care of parsing the data into relational output, as we see here. So this has been parsed the data into two different relational outputs based on the arrays that are exist in the JSON structure. Now let's talk about target. Okay, so let's load the data into normalized tables. So I have one table here. So if I log into Snowflake, so I have two tables already created. One is employee. So let me recreate it. Going to recreate it. Another one is e-contacts. Okay, so if you look at this, these are the columns which are coming from JSON, whatever highlighted here, right? So those are the columns that are coming from JSON. And apart from that, there is another column which is employee key in both the tables, right? So that's the column will get value from the system generated column, which is PK employee and FK employee. Okay. Now I have two tables in my Snowflake database. Okay. So that is exist in training DB within the training schema. So I'm going to select those connections in Snowflake. So I'm going to take another target. So let's name it as employee. So this target is going to hold the employee data, and this target is going to hold the another target is going to hold the data for contact information of that employee. So let's go to employee targets. So I have a Snowflake connection already created. So I'm going to choose that. Within that, I'm going to select the object employee for this target. Let's wait for a second. So go to training DB. Within training DB, there is a schema called training. Within that schema, there are two tables exist, which is train employee and also the employee contacts. So now we are first passing the data and send it to employee table, right? First choose that. So the target that we are choosing here is for an employee. Let's choose that. And the other one is for contact. So select the same connection as this is also stored in Snowflake. On select, go to training. You will have employee contact table here. Okay. So now whenever you drag and drop the link between hierarchy parser and to the target employee, it will ask you to select the object. So within the hierarchy parser, it has converted into two objects, which is employee and contact, right? So let's try to drag and drop the link. You see, it is prompted to this page. This is where you will have to choose the object in which you're mapping to the target, right? So just choose employee here, and likewise do it for contact as well. So this is for contact. Okay. Now let's go to field mapping. So in field mapping, we'll have to map these columns. So since the column names are same, right, for all of most of them, so use this option to map the columns automatically. So whatever is not mapped, just map them manually and go to another target as well. That's all. So let's validate the mapping now. So the mapping is valid. Save it and run it. So you have executed the mapping, and let's wait for this page to prompt to the my jobs. So go to my jobs, and that's where your mapping is running. So let's wait for this to go into running state. So in source you have two JSON files, right? So if you just click on this, okay. So from source it is pulling two JSON files, okay, and it is going to pass those JSON files into hierarchy parser for the convert for them to convert into relational output. So let's refresh. Let's try to refresh. Now the data has been parsed and converted into relational output. Let's go to Snowflake and see if the data has been loaded into two tables. So one is employee. Okay, you see the data has been loaded here. Okay, and the other one is employee contacts. Okay, so if you look at employee, if I take one employee as an example, right? So for this but employee, so the key was generated as one, right? So if you want to look at the contact details of this employee, so what is the desk phone and what is the mobile number, you'll have to take this key as a reference and go to employee contacts. And for one, there is information related to the contact, right? So this is how you'll have to map. Okay, again, like this is not coming from source. This is generated by the hierarchy parser transformation whenever you want to convert the data into normalized format. Okay, so this is all about converting the data from JSON format to the relational output. So if you have any questions, please comment, and if you can also call me on the given contact number here. Okay, thank you guys. Bye bye.